So, Derek. I was born here, actually here in Washington State, specifically Bellevue. Yeah, definitely different. I mean, I went to a school that was predominantly white, um, that had a large, did have a large minority population or percentage, and it was like Latino and all that, but no one was Cambodian. And there's a certain lifestyle that you have, or just cultural differences that I had to like face in that, and knowing that I was a minority, but that I didn't share a minority group. Like I was singled out essentially. Like there's a Chinese population and kind of group, and then there's Latino and white and everything like that. But being Cambodian and being like trying to have that commonality with some of my peers was really hard. It was really different growing up because I didn't speak Khmer. It was really different growing up in a place where I wasn't surrounded by Khmer people, especially since I didn't speak Khmer, so I just felt like I was losing touch with that Khmer culture that I always wanted to be with. But as I grew up, I just didn't have any Khmer friends growing up, and not being able to speak it meant I just got more isolated from the culture, and whether it be music or like shows and stuff like that, I could never like relate or talk and watch it. Um, Definitely. Like when it came to holidays, Christmas and stuff like that was we all celebrated that normally. Trying to be American and trying to do stuff that Americans do and things like that. So we'd celebrate Christmas. We'd try to celebrate holidays like that, and we wouldn't understand how to celebrate it properly. I mean, it'd be like we knew the tree, we knew you gave gifts, but I mean, I never grew up with gifts under my tree. We had a tree, and I would get like, a red packet with like $20 in it or something like that. Like I would experience the holiday, essentially, but I wouldn't be able to relate with any of my classmates. Like I didn't know what a stocking was until high school. I didn't know what stuff like that was. And in terms of parenting, my parents were very traditional. They weren't very progressive in that sense, but I know a lot of of my peers had very traditional parents as well. But there was a unique type of traditional with my parents that I've come to respect and kind of understand from their point of view, but really resented it as a child. It was coming from a point of refugees and those immigrants coming out of war and stuff like that. So coming out of a refugee camp, I can't really expect my parents to understand what a normal, quote unquote normal or average high school life, middle school and elementary school life of a American kid is. I mean, like trying to talk about like homecoming and like stuff like that, and asking like, could I have some money for homecoming, the homecoming dance and stuff like that. And they would never understand, like, why would you spend $25, $50 on going out to dance to music, like, at night, and then have to wear suits and buy a corsage or boutonniere and stuff like all that stuff went straight over their head with that. And it was almost impossible to relate with them, anything. It was kind of like how people would be like, oh, this person is doing this, or this person is doing this, and like, I should go do that, but like, they wouldn't be able to understand that. Things like sleepovers too, oh my gosh. Sleepovers were impossible. It wouldn't make sense. Logically, when you think about it, it doesn't really make sense that when you have they work so hard to make a home and like put a roof over your head, and you want to go sleep at someone else's house, like just for fun, not for a purpose. And I'll be like, but that's what everyone does. That's what everyone does. And like, they wouldn't get it. So it's like, it was such a distinct difference in our backgrounds that kind of made us clash. And it's made me appreciate what I've had. I'm definitely so much more fortunate than they were, and I feel blessed for that. Like the fact that I can have an iPhone, or I can go on Facebook or go on Instagram or stuff like that and talk about just stupid things or like trivial things, as opposed to having to worry about where I'm gonna get my next meal, or like whether or not I'm gonna step on a landmine or something like just drastic like that. So we had different priorities growing up. Yeah. So with Cambodian culture, it was a really fickle thing with me. I think growing up with Cambodian culture, but also being immersed into Chinese culture and like learning about. Took Chinese in middle school, and my family speaks Mandarin and Chow Chow and Diju and all that stuff. So trying to connect to my Cambodian roots and my Cambodian side was pretty difficult, especially not speaking Khmer. I went to visit Cambodia well, I mean, technically my first time was when I was like a baby, like 1 or 2, but my first real time I would say would be in like middle school when I really went back and kind of saw it and was able to take in everything. But I felt as much as an outsider as someone who doesn't have any connection to Cambodian roots would. I went there not speaking Khmer, not eating as much Khmer food as I could have. I mean, like some things, but like going there, I felt like an outsider, and I never, we celebrated Cambodian holidays, Cambodian New Year and stuff like that. I'd go to the temples or the Wats and stuff and play Cambodian games like Klok Klak or like Kate and all that stuff, like card games and stuff, but I never felt immersed into the culture. I've always felt like I'm someone peering in from the outside just because I could never speak. I could never talk to the elders, I could never talk to people and kind of relate to that story. But trying to rekindle my heritage now, especially growing up and going to college, has been like a massive change from going from my high school and my high school life to coming down to University of Washington. Like seeing Khmer people being, normal, like normal Americans, like rather than being the Khmer, refugees or immigrants that I know growing up that are like close to my parents, but now these are Khmer people that are my age, that are doing things that I do, that, go to dances, go to movies and stuff like that. Like, I don't want to say normal people, but like as a typical American, like life. The great thing about that is that growing up, when I didn't have Khmer people to talk to, it was so hard to relate. But now that I'm older and I'm surrounded by more Khmer people and I can kind of speak on my experiences and relate them to the others, there's so many things that I don't even think about, that like so many people, like I don't even consider like unique or like something that we would share as a Khmer community. I kind of think of it as mine. But now I realize that it's like a Khmer thing. Things like the smell of the boiled eggs with the, what is the name of that called? Can't remember it now. But like just food things, like food especially, like coming home to like rice soup or like with those Chinese donuts or the shredded pork or stuff like that, like all that, and the dry fish. Oh my gosh, coming from Cambodia, I don't know. I thought it was out of this world that we would bring so much dried fish back from Cambodia. I'm like, you could just import it or something, right? But everyone I know is like, everyone who's Cambodian has a story of just so much dry fish everywhere, and it's like, it's great with that. I think Khmer karaoke, I don't know, karaoke is something that I was so annoyed with growing up, just because I couldn't have anyone over and stuff like that. Like the Khmer karaoke would be like something I'd be kind of embarrassed about, and now I love it, but it's like I'd be embarrassed about it because it's so loud and my parents are so loud, and just family, like just Khmer people when they're singing, and it's like it's so great now, but like growing up is like I didn't speak the language, so it's like it's all this noise coming to me, and it sounded so cool at times, but it was just like a lot. So I think a lot of people can kind of take away from that. I think one thing that we're losing right now, and I think is the biggest deal, is our respect for the elders. I think respect for elders is important. I don't believe that age has a big should have a central point on anything, but respecting people that are older and have lived that life longer than you and like have been through everything, or a lot of things is really crucial. I think a lot of people nowadays are trying to take things into their own hands too quickly. And that's kind of a traditional value. We kind of learn to listen to our parents and respect our elders. And while there's limits to that, like we obviously shouldn't, just be under their wing their entire time, and we should learn to be independent and all that stuff. But there's a certain amount of respect that you are still required from you to your parent, despite whether you're trying to be independent and grow up like that. That they struggled this much for you, and the least you could do, not trying to guilt trip anything but anyone, but it's like the least you could do is kind of take a step back and look at it from their point of view. And I think empathy in terms of cultural differences and like differences of growing up and background is really important. People forget that the things that you have right now and the struggles you have right now aren't to be neglected, aren't to be overshadowed by war or famine and stuff like that for our parents and our older generation, but it's also something that you need to take into consideration, that they never had to face these problems. So you have to explain it from a point of view of someone who's not your best friend, who's like not gonna understand when someone said something mean about you on Facebook or something like that, and how it's gonna be hard to understand that. Beyond the Khmer Rouge and everything that happened, the travesties and the tragedy that happened there, which I do still think needs to be talked about more, as an example of what not to do anymore, and what example of the hardships that our past generation has faced, is how just the fun, the love, and like the community that Khmer food, music, and like party, or like games, right? Things like that brings, and like how different our food is compared to a lot of people. And I think a lot of it stems from the Khmer Rouge and the hardships. A lot of games and a lot of food stem from not having as much as as a lot of people do. Food that needs to be dried and salted and stuff like that, so you can preserve it without a refrigerator and stuff like that. So a lot of things where it's like the fact that we were impacted by war but not defined by it. And I think that's the biggest thing, is that we aren't a monolith, and that a lot of us never had never had the misfortune of having to live through war, but it still lives on through all of us in a way that we can grow from it, and we understand what it had to be done and what had to be survived through, and we kind of like build upon that rather than being pulled back by it. My favorite part, I spoke about earlier about being not Cambodians not being a monolith, but I think there's a lot that Cambodians in general, and Khmer people, now that I'm talking to more of them, that we can kind of relate to on a very personal level and very intimate level. Just the relationship with our parents and relationship with our family or our homeland in Cambodia, that a lot of ethnicities I feel may have difficulties because just how broad and expanded they are in America, and how much they've diffused across America. When you think about like Chinese immigrants and stuff like that, and like just the difference between how tight and close-knit a lot of Khmer communities are versus how diverse Chinese or European and all these other racial groups, how diverse they can be within America themselves, and how segmented they can be, whether east, west, north. Like I've never heard of a North Khmer versus South Khmer having very big differences and stuff like that. I mean, but then you think about South China, North China, East China, or like you think about even like countries in the Middle East and stuff like that, and all that stuff where you have places where you can kind of segment yourself. But in Cambodian culture, we kind of see ourselves as Cambodian, and there's no kind of divide there, which is really cool. I feel like every Cambodian person can relate with the just like the little things that I don't know how my parents can like communicate and be on sync with this, but things like whether it's like finding we found you outside of a trash can or like a dumpster and stuff like that, and like those little things, like those weird little funny things that they say it in Cambodian or in like a different language, it sounds like, you know, normal, but now if I tell that to an American or someone who doesn't know anything about my culture, it sounds absolutely insane. And I'm like, oh yeah, your parents never said they found you near a dumpster? Oh, what? And like, oh, they say, you know, and then it's like they say a lot of Chinese, and like it just sounds different with a lot of stories. A lot of the ones that really impacted me and stayed with me are stuff about, you know, their immigration, their refugee, whether it be like dealing with hunger and dealing with trying to find food, and also, you know, there's the truth to it, and there's also like the pride that comes with like surviving that I really love, with my dad, and talking about how he carried his brother and all this stuff through like, you know, barbed wire and all this stuff. Like there's a lot of truth to it, but there's also a lot of like getting hit with a hand grenade and all this other stuff. I'm like, I value it so much because there's so much life to it, and I love the fact that we can look back on it as an experience that he was able to fight and survive through. And I think it's so fortunate that we're able to talk about it in a sense that it's something that we grew from and we thrived despite the unimaginable. And it's a blessing that a lot of people aren't able to do, and I feel that I need to continue that story, and I can't let that stop at me or stop at my father and stuff like that. Well, first, something that I would love to bring up and talk about, and I think it's a major thing, is media, right? I think Cambodians in the media, growing up, I wanted to be an actor, I wanted to be a comedian, and I loved watching movies. I loved the Jackie Chan, like I watched like every Jackie Chan movie, martial arts movies and stuff like that, and I loved it. And I loved seeing Chinese people on screen and Asian people being not just the Asian character, but being the main character, being the hero, being the villain, being the someone that needs to be saved, someone that is saving, and all that stuff, being regular people, right? And even growing up till now, I still see TV, and I get happy when I see an Asian character that's not the Asian character, but is the character. And rather than being the token Asian character, is the, you know, like rather than just being the smart one or the hacker or something like that, is maybe a jock, or it plays different character types and archetypes that we don't typically see portrayed in media. But the biggest thing that I never saw growing up was Cambodian representation whatsoever. I mean, I know that, you know, Cambodians don't represent, you know, a big majority or a big stake in America, but the fact that, you know, we exist and that we're a big community still in America, but we don't see any of us in Hollywood, and it just doesn't make sense growing up, and it's kind of really pushed me away from pursuing a work in the creative field. As I'm a dancer, and I teach dance, and I do dance, I choreograph, but I rarely see another Cambodian in a field of creative work. And I think we strive as a group of people that have faced harsh adversity to rebound from that adversity and make a lot of money and have a lot of wealth, essential wealth. And so we kind of seek those jobs that give us that wealth. So whether it be being forced or pushed to go towards engineering, go to becoming a doctor, lawyer, and all that stuff. And we're kind of pushed towards that because it's where the money is, and it's where our parents never had the opportunity to study at a university and become a doctor or become a lawyer. And like, those stuff makes a lot of money. And it's like, but we can never really push for our passions because we kind of are in that mindset of we need to make use of what we have. And like I feel like I always felt growing up, if I wanted to become a dancer or an actor or a comedian, first that there wasn't anyone really like me, so I didn't have anyone to kind of look up to. And also it's like, if this doesn't work out, I've wasted all my parents' hard work. And they've struggled and, you know, work 2-3 jobs and do all this stuff for me just so I can fail essentially at like becoming an actor and like not make a lot of money and not be able to do the things I wanted to, like help them pay off loans and or buy a car, buy a house and stuff like that. And so that put a lot of stress on me as a child and as a teenager growing up, deciding what I wanted to do. And I think the biggest thing we need to do is break that divide and break that barrier and have it be okay for Cambodian Americans, Asian Americans to take that step forward and kind of build our own path, because we shouldn't be set on a pathway. We should be able to be as much as we are Cambodian, be American as well, and have that American ideal of being able to do what your heart kind of has you desire.